Week 11 of the NFL season is here. I'm Chris, your NFL writer here at Occupy Fantasy, here to talk about the 11-game main slate for Week 11 here on Saturday, November 19th. Tomorrow's action looking pretty interesting, I'd say. Before we dive into it, my favorite play on the slate is what I always like to lead off with, and it is New England Patriots running back Ramondre Stevenson. Stevenson's just priced at $6,700 here on DraftKings. It is his highest price of the season, but compared to other running backs, specifically on DraftKings, Stevenson is still a little too cheap on this slate, considering that the Patriots are favored by 3 to 3.5 points at most places that you can look. He's got the most carries in this backfield. He actually leads the entire Patriots roster in targets in the passing game as well. So consider Ramondre Stevenson one of the best running back plays for any contest type on this slate, and someone that you should start your builds with over here on DraftKings. Over on FanDuel, Stevenson is a little more expensive at $8,100, but I do think there are ways to get him into all of your lineup types this week, so I still like prioritizing him over there. Here in Week 11, there's been a lot of talk around the industry, a lot of sharp content creators that we respect and like Al Smizzle, for example, very popular here on YouTube. Justin Freeman from Run the Sims, another content creator that I know Brian has partnered with in the past here at Occupy, talking about whether or not stacking is not going to be viable here in Week 11. Me personally, I do think stacking is still viable this week, specifically 3-1 stacking a couple of different games. So I'm going to start off by talking about some high-risk stuff, and I'll show you some of the inside baseball of how I make some decisions of what to do in DFS contests week to week. So I actually do build my own projections, and I have some game scores that I put together. This is not an uncommon thing. I know a lot of people have different ways of arriving at their own version of game scores, but effectively what I do is I take the 3 highest scoring players on each side of a game, so from each team, and then I want to sum up their projections at the median, which I have as DK points in my own spreadsheet here, that their floor and their ceiling, which I use about 1.5 standard deviations of a player's projected points to arrive at that number. And for me here this week, I'm most interested in the Minnesota Vikings and Dallas Cowboys game in the late window. I'm looking for game scores on my end from the 6 total players that approach about 190 cumulative ceiling fantasy points to be interested in it as a high-risk game stack. So for me this week, the only one on the slate that meets that criteria is Minnesota-Dallas. Now, the Minnesota side of the ball is the one that I'm most interested in for high-risk contests because Minnesota is one of the handful of teams that pass the ball at an above-average rate this season, so they meet our criteria for double stacking. So I do like using Kirk Cousins double stack specifically with a run back from the Dallas Cowboys side. Unfortunately, we do not have access to this really juicy Kansas City Chiefs Los Angeles Chargers game on the main slate, but if it was on the main slate, it would be another game stack I'd consider. With Buffalo and Cleveland being played in a dome now at Ford Field in Detroit to avoid the blizzard in Buffalo, I'm also interested in that game. It's right on the threshold of what I'm looking for, about 190 fantasy points, specifically with the Buffalo side. We've got Josh Allen. We've got a really thin wide receiver core with the Buffalo Bills this week. We have just 4 guys, I believe, on the active roster that will be available unless they elevate somebody today. That's Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Isaiah McKenzie, and Khalil Shakir. So double stacking Josh Allen and bringing back Nick Chubb at running back, although he's a little expensive, or Donovan Peoples-Jones, Amari Cooper, some underpriced, clear top-end wide receivers in their offense are some good options there. Then we have the Philadelphia Eagles, Indianapolis Colts behind that, Denver Broncos, Las Vegas Raiders behind that. Very interesting opportunities here in high-risk contests, I think, for stacking. Now, at the very bottom of my personal rankings here, I have the Bears and the Falcons, even though they have a very high team total, as the worst game stack of the week. It does not mean these are bad DFS plays this week, because in my projections, I have Justin Fields as the best quarterback to roster in DFS this week because I think he's going to rush for nearly 90 yards. So the reason they don't pop well as a game stack is because this score is from 6 players in a game, and I just do not think that there's enough fantasy scoring to go around in these offenses the way that they run their offenses right now to support fully game stacking those games. So that's a situation where maybe you use Justin Fields by himself or with a cheap teammate at the most, and someone like Kyle Pitts on the other side if you want a skinny stack, or no Falcon. Same situation with Marcus Mariota if you are interested in the underdog side of that game. All right, back to our usual agenda here on the show. The first place that we like to start after talking about my favorite play is the betting market data. And this week there are a few clear favorites. The Baltimore Ravens are favored by 13 to 13.5 points, depending on where you look, which means that the running back that has operated as their main guy over the last few weeks with everybody else suffering some injuries is Kenyon Drake. We should be most interested in him in this backfield at just 5,900 here on DraftKings. Drake will run behind an offensive line that is struggling to block so far this year, so that might be problematic, but it is a really good matchup for Drake as the Carolina Panthers are in the bottom half of the league defending running backs in both the running and passing game this season. So if you want some leverage off the passing game in Buffalo, Devin Singletary as the starting tailback for the Bills is definitely the best way to do it at just $5,800 here on DraftKings. And on FanDuel, Singletary is actually extremely cheap as well. He's just $6,400. Could be an interesting play over here. Philadelphia Eagles are favored by about a touchdown, depending on where you look. I have it at -7 right now on DraftKings Sportsbook, last I looked. So Miles Sanders getting half of the work in the running game for the Eagles is someone that you could consider as well at the running back position. The Bengals favored by 4 in their matchup with the Pittsburgh Steelers divisional game. Joe Mixon with the highest opportunities at the position off of a monster game before his bye week. Once again, someone that you could consider as well in DFS contests. Now, only Stevenson from this group that I've discussed actually projects to be extremely popular. The other running back that is very cheap this week that projects to be very popular, in fact, he's the most popular play at the running back position in the Occupy model, is David Montgomery. And you see him slotted into my dummy lineup here as I started the video at just $6,100 here on DraftKings. I believe he's just $6,200 over on FanDuel. David Montgomery is going to be another running back that is in a really good spot to succeed here on the road against the Falcons because Khalil Herbert is on injured reserve. So the Bears may lean on Montgomery even more than normal in the running game when it's not Justin Fields due to injury in their backfield. The other running back that we talk about every single week, he was our cover boy last week. He's still in a very advantageous high touch volume role for the Houston Texans. Dameon Pierce, Texans run blocking not good, and the matchup not good. The Commanders are very good defending the run this year, the second best run defense in the NFL according to Football Outsiders DVOA data. So that will make it a pretty tough game for Pierce this Sunday against the Commanders. Personally, my favorite running backs to play on this slate are Stevenson and Montgomery. And I think I will stay that way right up until Sunday morning, and I'll see where we're at with ownership because the nature of pricing on this slate actually does push us towards some double tight end lineups. And I think that is the reason why we're not going to be flexing a running back this week. We have a lot of cheap options at the tight end position, especially when you consider these guys to be either the primary or the secondary receiving weapon in their offenses. And with most of these guys priced below $5,000 on DraftKings, below $6,000 on FanDuel, playing two of them ends up being really viable, especially in the current scoring environment that we have in the NFL. We only have about 8 teams that are passing the ball well above average, and a lot of them aren't even available on this slate. The Chiefs and the Chargers are playing each other, but it's the primetime game on Sunday night. The Miami Dolphins are on bye. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are on bye. That's basically half of the teams that we want to double stack being out of action on the main slate, which allows us to pay for some more tight ends, do some naked QBs or skinny stacks, or smaller stacks like 2-1s instead of the full-on 3-1s outside of the games I mentioned at the top of the video. 2 tight ends this week are actually underperforming wide receivers in the Occupy model. They are Atlanta's Kyle Pitts, and they are Denver's Greg Dulcich. Both of these guys are priced very favorably on this slate, and I think there's a real viable way to play both of them in low-risk contests this week. So this is a pretty good framework, I think, for starting a low-risk lineup here in week 11. The other thing people are going to do is get some correlation by playing Justin Fields. Fields is not only going to pop in just standard fantasy point projection models. If you look at our quarterback model here at Occupy, he is the number 3 play on the slate and actually projects for the highest ownership to second highest ownership, depending on where you are playing this weekend. His price has come up a little bit, but the way he's been running the football lately, he is the number 1 quarterback play in fantasy football since October. So I don't see that slowing down the way that they're calling plays. We've got Fields in here. We've got $5,350 per player remaining. We have a few modestly priced options that can help us get over the line here. And we should look at some of the high-owned wide receivers to really see what everyone is doing to get there. So this is the Occupy model for Week 11. Here's wide receivers on this slate. Highest owned, CeeDee Lamb, Dallas Cowboys, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Detroit Lions, Terry McLaurin, Cortland Sutton, Stephon Diggs. These are the studs on this slate. But we've got Garrett Wilson at $4,900 for the New York Jets, one of my favorite values overall because Corey Davis is going to be out once again for the Jets. So we can slot Wilson in here at the wide receiver position. We're going to play a cheap defense as well. We look at what the field is doing in low-risk contests this week at defense, and it looks like the Pittsburgh Steelers in their matchup with the Cincinnati Bengals are going to be one of the 3 most popular defenses here on DraftKings at just $2,300. So we can plug them in. And now we have $7,100 per player remaining to fill out our wide receiver positions. And when we look at the way some of these wide receivers are priced, Lamb is $7,500 here on DraftKings. Brown is $7,200 on DraftKings. Gabe Davis in that high total game for the Bills, $6,300. Michael Pittman, $6,100. Sutton, $6,000. There are a lot of combinations in here with these high upside wide receivers that are just outside of the very top of the pricing table that are extremely viable in low risk contests this week. My favorite up here to start with is Amon-Ra St. Brown and figure out the rest. You see you have $7,000 remaining. You can play around with some of the numbers here if you'd like for your own low-risk builds, maybe come down from someone to create a little more salary and get up to a more expensive wide receiver. But I do think this is the best way to approach low-risk contests, specifically here on DraftKings, which is where I play most of my low-risk contests, to be completely clear. Now, going back to the game stacks that I talked about at the beginning of the video, like the Vikings side of that game against the Cowboys. It's one of only 3 games in the late window this week. Let's see what we can do with a Minnesota Vikings Dallas Cowboys stack here in Week 11. In the Occupy model, Kirk Cousins and Dak Prescott both inside the top 8. They're the 7th and 8th ranked quarterbacks inside the top 8, but this is one of the games on both sides that even the Occupy model likes, given the quarterback rankings. We have Josh Allen as the far and away best play on the slate at quarterback, but you're going to have to pay for it depending on where you play. Most expensive quarterback on the slate. So let's focus on Kirk Cousins, who is modestly priced. You're going to end up paying for Cousins really with the wide receiver side. Jefferson, $9,100. Probably going to need him in here. We like targeting underperforming wide receivers here at Occupy. These are wide receivers that have had lots of targets, seen lots of air yards in recent weeks. We tend to look at the trailing 3 weeks of usage at the wide receiver position, and you see that just by filtering by underperforming wide receiver here in our wide receiver model, 2 Vikings are on here. Adam Thielen, just $5,500 over on DraftKings, $6,000 on FanDuel, and KJ Osborne, $4,000, DraftKings, $5,300 over on FanDuel. Obviously, at the tight end position, he's a little more expensive, but we also have TJ Hawkinson, who is the 2nd highest ranked tight end on the slate, and we project him to see just under 8 targets, so he's also viable. A lot of good combinations here with the Vikings. If we stay with the expensive plays and we get Lamb in here, we've got just over $4,000 per player remaining to finish off a lineup, so this is going to be pretty tight. The first thing that you could do, for example, is just stop here and have a 2-1 Vikings and Cowboys game stack. Now, I do think it's viable to 3-1 stack this, given some of the options we've discussed. Osborne's $4,000, Gallup and Thielen, and even Noah Brown are all playable, I would say, on this slate. At tight end, Schultz, $4,300, Hawkinson, $5,300. Probably going to have to get creative here, maybe play some cheaper running backs. One of my favorite ways, though, to save some salary on this slate in high-risk contests is to take advantage of the injuries at the tight end position for the Philadelphia Eagles. Dallas Goedert is going to be out, and one of these tight ends here, Jack Stoll, who plays a lot of snaps, about half the snaps for the Eagles, but is more of a blocker. Grant Calcaterra hasn't played a ton of snaps, but he is profiling as more of a pass catcher for them. Or Tyree Jackson, who was just activated from the PUP list. One of these guys is going to see a ton of snaps in Week 11 contests. My favorite is Calcaterra because I don't know if Jackson's going to be ready to play just yet. And if he profiles as more of the pass catcher at the minimum price, you can get him in here. That's some salary savings for you. $48.50 per player remaining. You can get to one of those other Minnesota wide receivers or tight ends here with this amount of salary remaining to finish off a 3-1 stack in Week 11 contests. Now, the other game that I like a lot is Buffalo and Cleveland, because Cleveland has some cheap wide receivers that allow us to get there. So we can go with Allen, Diggs, and Davis, and we've got $46.50 per player remaining. Donovan Peoples-Jones is right here at $4,600. got enough salary here to finish off a lineup at $4,700 for a 3-1 stack. Or again, you could 2-1 stack this. You could play another wide receiver that's not Gabriel Davis, could even not play Diggs and play Davis and have a lot of salary left to finish off a 3-1 stack. I do think that there are still paths to playing these high upside, high total offenses in high-risk contests. People are getting scared of this format, of this approach, but don't fret. I do think it's going to come around. We still have half of an NFL season to go, and these types of builds will rise to the top once again. That's going to do it for this video, folks. Good luck in Week 11. We will be back next week to talk about Week 12 of the NFL season for you on the channel. Do not miss out on what's coming up this week, though. We will have some special stuff going on for the 3-game slate this Thursday for Thanksgiving. So also happy Thanksgiving, folks, and we will talk to you soon.